Hello everyone, back to reading Plato's cave allegory, and quite quickly became political, right? So without further ado, let's jump back to the text. This is our third reading. And in the second reading, we figured out, okay, there are people who turn their heads into different directions, right? Some turn their heads towards the source of light, towards the idea of the good, and then they see the good. Others, however, are vicious but wise. They can see sharp, but they look into the wrong direction. And this is the problem that he introduces here first. So now the question is, what does that, right? However, I said, if this part of such nature were trimmed in earliest childhood and its ties of kinship with becoming were cut off, like leaden weights, I guess leaden weights, lead, right? Which eating and such pleasures, as well as their refinements naturally attach to the soul and turn its vision downward. If, say, it were rid of them and turned around toward the true things, this same part of the same human beings would also see them most sharply, just as it does those things toward which it now is turned. So yeah, what we see here is the idea that we have to start in early childhood with cutting off these weights that turn our view downward. We have to somehow educate children to see the idea of the good. Okay, and he goes on writing, it's likely, he said. And what about this? Isn't it likely, I said, and necessary as a consequence of what was said before, that those who are without education and experience of truth would never be adequate stewards of a city, nor would those who have been allowed to spend their time in education continuously to the end, the former because they don't have any single goal in life at which they must aim in doing everything they do in private or in public, the latter because they won't be willing to act, believing they have emigrated to a colony on the Isle of the Blessed while they are still alive. Okay, I think what he's saying here is that both don't want to work, we don't want them to work in the service of the city. The ones because they don't have a goal, they don't know the idea of the good. The other ones, they have seen the ideal life, right? Why would they want to work for such crazy stuff like a political city, where what is true today is untrue tomorrow? True, he said. Then our job as founders, I said, is to compel the best natures to go to the study, which we were saying before is the greatest, to see the good and to go up that ascent. And when they have gone up and seen sufficiently, not to permit them what is now permitted. So what is now permitted? That they retreat from the city, right? And from their tasks that they should fulfill in that city. So he repeats what is permitted, to remain there, I said, and not be willing to go down again, among those prisoners, or share their labors and honors, whether they be slighter or more serious. What? He said. Are we to do them an injustice and make them live a worse life when a better life is possible for them? So are we morally allowed to force them to be mayors and politicians? My friend, you have again forgotten. I said that it's not the concern of law that any one class in the city fare exceptionally well, but it contrives to bring this about in the city as a whole, harmonizing the citizens by persuasion and compulsion, making them share with one another the benefit that each is able to bring to the commonwealth. And it produces such men in the city not in order to let them turn whichever way each wants, but in order that it may use them in binding the city together. So yeah, it's here applied for the greater wealth, which he calls the commonwealth, right? Binding the city together. But I'm not entirely sure whether he says, so it's not for the law, but it is for harmonizing the citizens by persuasion and compulsion. I don't really understand that answer. So does he say this is not a question of justice, but this is the foundation of justice. So there's no law broken. This is what makes the city just in the first place. I guess he said that, right? That's true, he said. I did forget. Well then, Glaucon, I said, consider that we won't be doing injustice to the philosophers who come to be among us, but rather that we will say just things to them while compelling them besides to care for and guard the others. So it seems he suggests this is a path of persuasion, right? What is more compelling than a reason? Well, say that when such men come to be in the other cities, it is fitting for them not to participate in the labors of those cities, for they grow up spontaneously against the will of the regime in each. And a nature that grows by itself and doesn't owe its rearing to anyone has justice on its side, when it's not eager to pay off the price of rearing to anyone. Okay, I don't understand the passage here entirely. Let's just go on a little bit. So I think they would like to go to them, right? So, and they don't have to work. So they actually grew up, they got like this form of justice. They had education, right? So they could see, and so they will be eager to pay off the debt, I guess. I guess that's what it says, right? But then at the same time, he says they don't want to do it on free will. But you, we have forgotten for yourselves and for the rest of the city, like leaders and kings and hives, you have been better and more perfectly educated and more able to participate in both lives. So you must go down, each in his turn, into the common dwelling of the others and get habituated along with them to seeing the dark things. And in getting habituated to it, you will see 10 times better than the man there, and you know what each of the phantoms is and of what is a phantom, because you have seen the truth about fair and just good things. And thus the city will be governed by us and by you in a state of waking. He's so woke, right? Not in a dream, as the many cities nowadays are governed by men who fight over shadows with one another and form factions for the sake of ruling, as though it were some great good. But the truth is surely this, that city in which those who are going to rule are least eager to rule is necessarily governed in the way that is best and freest from faction. So yeah, this is interesting, right? So the city in which rulers don't want to rule is the most just, because they don't see the benefit in ruling, right? They just act for the weaker, and then we need to give them compensation. So that's actually the original argument that he makes in book 1 already. So yeah, Glaucon agrees, and now Socrates goes on. Do you suppose our pupils will disobey us when they hear this and be unwilling to join the labors of the city each in his turn, while living the greater part of the time with one another in the pure region? I don't know who he means here. Like, I guess the ones that he educates towards the good, right? These are the pupils. In the pure region. The greater part of the time living in the... Oh, so the labors of the city is not like labor like on the fields, it's like ruling the city, right? Impossible, he said, for surely we shall be laying just in injunctions on just men. However, each of them will certainly approach ruling as a necessary thing, which is the opposite of what is done by those who now rule in every city. Okay, that's the way it is, my comrade, I said. If you discover a life better than ruling for those who are going to rule, it is possible that your well-governed city will come into being. For here alone will the really rich rule, rich not in gold, but in those riches required by the happy man, rich in a good and prudent life. But if beggars, men hungering for want of private goods, go to public affairs, supposing that in them they must seize the good, it is impossible. When ruling becomes a thing fought over, such a war, domestic war, one within the family destroys these men themselves and the rest of the city as well. So ruling should never be a question of war and fights, right? That's very true, he said. Have you, I said, and I want to, like, in a current democracy, maybe it's good when people fight for who's going to rule, but we shouldn't give, like, these public offices much money, I guess, but then we introduce corruption. Yeah, so there are a lot of questions with regard to that, right? Have you, I said, any other life that despises political offices other than that of true philosophy? No, by Zeus, he said, I don't. But men who aren't lovers of ruling must go to it. Otherwise, rival lovers will fight. So yeah, so why do they have to go? What is the motivation? The motivation is that others rule badly, right? And nothing is worse than other people ruling badly. Who else will you compel to go to the guardian of the city than the men who are most prudent in those things through which a city is best governed, and who have other honors and a better life than the political life? No one else, he said. Do you want us now to consider in what way such men will come into being and how one will lead them up to light, just as some men are said to have gone from Hades up to the gods? Now, I think here is a good point to stop this particular reading. So we have asked, well, who should rule the city? Plato became very political. It shouldn't be a question of politics. That's what he says, right? It should be a question of, I mean, it remains to be political, not that we misunderstand each other, but it should not be a question of people trying to fight for power, but the best rulers are the ones who don't want, but then they will be compelled to rule because they see what is bad ruling, and nothing is worse than bad ruling when you know how it should be done better. So, and kind of an ideal. So you really wonder, will that work in our society? So if you have such ideal politicians, but maybe our politicians are not yet educated for that kind. I don't want to bash politicians, so that's kind of normal, like, oh yeah, politicians. I mean, they are bad and they are good politicians, right? The question is, which ones do we have in power right now? The ones who are directed towards the dark, or the ones who are directed to the light? Now, please don't bash politicians in the comments. I think that's quite an easy thing to do. Don't write something like, you know, politicians are so bad. I don't like that, right? It's so superficial. You can read it everywhere. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think very often these opinions are the first ones that we retreat to, and we may just fight in another realm of shadows, being employed by another shadow emperor. So if you like this, then please follow these readings. I want to read things every day, actually, with other people together, and then maybe we can have a comment section war. Hopefully not on like these left-wing or right-wing political topics, but a war on truth. So comment if you want to join the army of truth soldiers. And follow this channel. Thank you very much for watching.